Yes,
everyone, we're live. Welcome to the Hypnosis Rooms here, where we're going to be talking this week about how hypnosis is portrayed in the media. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Graham Webber. I'm a host of Hypnosis Online Meetups and a hypnotherapist. And I'm shared by my good friend, Adam. Adam, introduce yourself.
My name is Adam Cox. I'm a hypnotherapist. For the last few years, I've been in Harley Street. That all changed with COVID, so I do all my sessions over Zoom now. And I tend to specialize in weight loss, phobias, addictions, and more recently wealth and how people think about money.
Awesome.
Now, after all, we'd like to get talking. So if you've never used Clubhouse before, in the bottom right corner, you've got a picture of
if you have any friends who
may be interested in joining us this evening, you just send them a little ping. They have the choice of joining us or not. And right next to it, there's a little picture of a hand. If you press that and you wish to talk this evening, just simply press it and come on. Now, just make anyone aware that
we are actually
live on YouTube at the same time.
Why?
Because that means we can always be able to catch up your information in the future if you want to rewatch it, if you can't make everything through, and just getting the general information out.
So hypnosis in the media.
I think this complements massively on what we had last week, talking about stage hypnosis and does it assist hypnotherapists and practitioners in general. Adam, you work a lot in PR, so I'm sure you've got a lot of views on there.
Whether it is with
clientele or whatever who want to get PR and maybe what they are doing at the time. Have you ever worked with any hypnotherapists or big hypnotists or anything in your company?
No, not really. No, I mean, through my PR stuff, mainly it's big brands. So that might be pharmaceutical companies, tech companies, food and drink companies. We've just had an agreement to work with Bacardi. So it tends to be big brand stuff. So I don't, within PR, you tend to get publicists that tend to work with individuals, and then the kind of stuff I do, which is more brands. But for me, having worked in the media for over 20 years, and then at the age of 35, 36, deciding to be a clinical hypnotherapist, I was a bit nervous because throughout the days when I wasn't a hypnotherapist, wasn't a hypnotist, but being in the media, quite often you would see the scare stories, and not so much the broadcast media, but mainly the tabloids. They love a scandal. They love to prey on fears and are quite sensationalist, as you would expect. But when you see that happening to people in the field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, for me, it led to an element of nervousness. My goal was to grow and become quite high profile, and to use the media to do that. But the media are quite happy to play the game of building people up, and then when they reach a particular peak or anything like that, they love to destroy people. And for me, I'd seen them attempt to do that with people like Paul McKenna, and saw some of the sensationalist stuff, which built Darren Brown's brand. Obviously, he's not a hypnotherapist, more of a mentalist in many sense. But they love to kind of exploit, I think, people's fascination, but also fear with hypnosis and the mind. So I think it's a very sharp double-edged sword. There is that fascination. So if you can use the media well, you can use that to access a huge audience. But equally, you've got to be aware that the media can turn, particularly on people within in the hypnosis field, because there is that caricature almost of the Machiavellian hypnotist using it for ill gains, and you'll always find the odd story about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got some examples that we've done a little bit of research for later on. But it's quite interesting the way you use the word exploit and the way how the media wants to exploit what you've got.
In some cases,
as therapists, we want to be able to exploit the rapport that we've got with the client in order to be able to achieve what we are going to achieve. And doing so, it's quite interesting, isn't it? You work in a PR, public relations, but yet, as you also say, the media will happily turn their relation round, and if it can make them literally sit on that pedestal that a little bit higher than where that person is who's going forward for whatever it is.
following on
from last week, we did speak about stage hypnotists. We also spoke about how we all believe that stage hypnotists have a massive value for practitioners because they bring in awareness, they bring so much to the therapy world. The great stage hypnotist, who's a therapist as well, Mike Mandel, he's running a 5-day complimentary course next week through Facebook. And I've seen many people who said, I really want to learn hypnosis. So from his exploitation of stage hypnosis, that also brings it in as well. And whether it's not necessarily a news article, but just by posting something out on Facebook and having that information or his background story, it's been able to pull that in too.
So obviously
the media, what big thing comes to mind for you, Adam, with any sort of advertisement that has recently played thoughts in your mind towards the hypnosis world?
I would say the reasonably big story about hypnosis outside of people like Paul McKenna regularly getting kind of PR and publicity stuff out there was probably the story in the Times recently, which positioned Marissa Peer's RTT therapy as dangerous. And that's relatively easy to do. If you look at the Times article, what's interesting there is by them putting the word dangerous in quotations, what they're saying is that someone has described it as dangerous, but not necessarily them. And by doing so, they're able to say, well, this isn't us defaming, or criticizing this therapy. We're just reporting that some people think this therapy is dangerous. And it's quite a cheeky thing. I mean, normally you get this kind of approach from the tabloids. This is the Times. It's a very credible newspaper. And the overall essence of the story is that Marissa Peer's making millions from therapy, which is questionable. And because effectively the essence of the story is that these therapists are trained to go into situations that they're not fully prepared to deal with, actually means they're putting the risk of the client at stake. So this is a good example of how the media every now and then like to prey on the fears really of hypnosis and related kind of things. The media, they won't be able to differentiate between NLP, RTT, and all these kind of different trademarks and brands that are effectively hypnosis based therapy work. So the end user gets the sense of, okay, well, Marissa Peer is known for being a hypnotherapist, and what she does is dangerous. And the problem for the industry is that then you get this kind of perception that therefore all hypnotherapy is dangerous. So it's just an example of how the media can prey on this. What I didn't see, and I've had to Google around, I couldn't find it, is Marissa Peer having her right to reply and, trying to clarify things. It seems like, her approach to this is damage limitation and not saying anything, which for me, I don't think is a helpful approach. Maybe she's just made a judgment call that if she says nothing, the story kind of extinguishes itself, and then she can just get focused on what she's doing. But it's not helpful if there isn't things clarified when these stories come up.
And the media, even videos, whatever the media is in whichever way, it can always be very different.
I always remember a couple of years ago when I don't know if you remember the video of a soldier at Windsor who was marching along, and he said, "Make way for the Queen's Guard." This person was literally in his pathway, and he shoved her straight over the barrier. And everyone went, "Oh, it's ridiculous. What did you wait a minute.
If you actually watch the whole video, he actually told about 3 or 4 times she was in breach of his location, which was therefore she was trespassing. And obviously the big picture.
Whether it comes to Marissa,
whatever work she does with that, I don't know anything about it.
I've worked with some people who've done RTT, I don't necessarily know much about it, but then there's many modalities that we don't all know very much about. But all I know is that she's very, very successful in her marketing. And obviously, whatever brand she created, it then comes down to, although it is her brand, it comes down to the trainers and people who are teaching us stuff, which obviously created the story behind what was there. Now, another person, we did actually try to get him. Actually, in fact, before going any further on that, actually, we've got Rowan. Rowan, welcome, as always. I'm sure you've got a very valuable point to pass across. How can we assist you?
Yeah, it was really sort of a question and an observation. I was sort of looking back at this, going all the way back to Mesmer. And, you know, when they did the sort of investigation into Mesmer, they were actually looking at, I think it was Ellis, I think his name was, one of Mesmer's students. And the only thing they really did was they suggested to a boy that this tree was magnetized and he'd magnetized another tree or something. So they used this as proof that magnetism or mesmerism wasn't a valid therapeutic sort of modality. Whereas, like, it didn't actually call into question the fact that it cured hundreds or thousands of people across Europe by that point, and some really sort of miraculous cures, like regaining people's sight and things like this. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's maybe confirmation bias on my part, but it seems to me that any time there's any positive press about hypnosis or these sort of unconscious therapies, like things like the BBC placebo documentary that was on, again, a few weeks ago, they were talking about hypnosis being sort of conscious control of the placebo effect. And it seems to me that anytime anything positive comes out, immediately there's films appear that have got hypnosis being shown in a negative light, or suggestion being shown in a negative light, or these sort of manipulation being given a very negative across the board. And, you know, we use quotes all the time, the same as these sort of dangerous within quotes, within our multiple embedded quotes and metaphors and things like that. But the mainstream media seems to use them in this sort of way of weaseling out of sort of accountability for what they're saying, doesn't it? But I don't know what you guys' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this is all about not necessarily an agenda. You know, knowing as many journalists as I do, I can guarantee there isn't any kind of collective committees where people are doing that kind of stuff. It's very pragmatic, and the sad reality is that the positive hypnosis stories are going to come across as testimonials, case studies, effectively self-serving vehicles for people to promote their own products. So the journalists are going to hear those, see those, and then think, oh, okay, well, there's a self-serving motive here. Whereas if a hypnotist is arrested for being creepy, I think Graham found a story like that, then effectively it aligns with a lot of the fears or concerns that people have about hypnotists and those kind of almost the archetype of the kind of you know, nasty, creepy, you know, hypnotist villain that you see in a lot of kind of Hollywood movies over the last decades. And because it's more shocking, or because it's, you know, it might involve a crime, that's going to make itself to the front pages and that kind of stuff. Whereas all the good news around hypnosis, unfortunately, that's going to make it into the feature sections, you know, all the way in the middle of the newspaper, all the way in the lifestyle section of these websites. And that's why it's not going to make it as high profile. So from a general public's perspective, the negative stories about hypnosis become the big stories, and the positive stories become quite often not even seen. And I think that can skew the perception as to what's really going on.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Sort of thinking back to the BBC placebo documentary, their bit on hypnosis was like really sort of skimmed over towards the end of the show. I don't know if you saw it or not, but it was you had blink and you miss it, you know.
Let's face it as well. The whole thing with hypnosis is hypnosis. You know, we all know many
hypnotists.
In some cases, all of us.
And in some cases, all of us don't truly know what hypnosis exactly is. So if the media ever get a sniff of something which sounds out of this world, however, woo-woo, whatever the word it is that you want to use for it, they'll jump on it because it's a story, because they're trying to talk about the unknown. And it's a really great point now that you've brought up, Ronan. As always, we appreciate you coming up to share them bits, mate. Cheers for that.
Yeah, as I'd mentioned before as well, because we mentioned to everyone before, we are also streaming on YouTube, bits and bobs. We tried to look for some visuals
to share as well. The simple way to do this was just
positive and negative news feeds
into Google, and one that we came up with. Where is it here?
Title reads
straight away. Hypnotist arrested for giving illegal prostate exams to his patients. Now, Adam, straight off, what's your thoughts on that title?
I mean, unfortunately for me, calling myself the hypnotist, the fact that it says hypnotist arrested, immediately you've got, what makes this newsworthy isn't man arrested for doing something creepy that happens to be a hypnotist. It's the fact that he's a hypnotist. So the Daily Mirror in this case are again preying on people's fears that at some level hypnotists have power. So effectively, I've not read the whole article here, but at some level, the story they're trying to communicate is that he's using the fact that he's a hypnotist to take advantage of people without their consent. So effectively, very creepy guy, but it's the fact that they're using the fact that he's a hypnotist to make it newsworthy. And again, you see this not only in hypnosis, you see it in all different professions as well. The vast majority of doctors are good people helping people. But if there is a doctor that happens to be a serial killer, Shipman style, that is going to dominate the news, because these are people that you should be able to trust. You should be able to trust a doctor. You should be able to trust a nurse. You should be able to trust a hypnotherapist. So when you see stories like that, that's why they become newsworthy and interesting. And it's a very clickbaity title there. But that works. And that's how the media is right now. They need to get eyeballs on pages, and having this kind of clickbait title, you want to find out, how did this hypnotist manage to give prostate exams without people's consent? And I'm curious. I want to read the story. I want to know how he did it, and I want to know how long he's locked up for as well. So it is an interesting story, but for me, again, it preys on this belief system that hypnotists have control to the extent that they can get people to do things that they don't want to do. And I think that's why you see so many headlines like that, because, I mean, I don't know if you remember Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo had an identical storyline every single episode. And at least 1 in 5 episodes had a hypnotist that would hypnotize Scooby or Shaggy to do something that they didn't want to do. So there is this conditioning that we've had even in childhood, that hypnotists are sneaky, that they have power over people, and they're going to get them to do things that they don't want to do. And I think because we've had that childhood conditioning at some level, the media is preying on that to have negative stories about the media. And I think that's, it's unfortunate, because there will be some people that then think, oh, hypnotists can do this kind of stuff and will do this kind of stuff if they can get away with it, which isn't good for the industry, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. And then, can't just take someone in that dimension, especially
for a prostate check. And as it says there, he's charging £310 a pop. That someone already has an idea of something's going on. Or obviously, it's just complete made-up fluff in order just to get a story from somewhere.
So, obviously, where and how do we believe that would be portrayed? If a layman was looking at that, whether it is from the mistake of
Little Britain, Look Into My Eyes, and all this sort of thing. Or, I literally have people who said to me before, they will not talk to me unless they've got like a tinfoil hat on them. We've all had that sort of situation. And these are the sort of people who actually believe that you could genuinely put someone into hypnosis in order to do that. So it'll put some worry on people. But at the same time, it would also creep other people. If they're able to do this, surely hypnosis is an all-powerful thing to make me stop smoking, to make me get rid of anxiety and things like that as well. So, you're very good at talking about this, Adam. How do you think that could be leveraged towards a therapist?
By the way in which the media have already preconceived ideas about hypnosis and hypnotherapy could be utilized for a therapist is to accept that there is an appetite, there is a hunger for interesting hypnosis related stories. So for me, wearing my publicist hat rather than hypnotist hat, I would say, you know, you can use that to challenge preconceived ideas, or to play on preconceived ideas just enough to kind of then, you know, work on some dispelling of myths and misconceptions. You know, so for example, there are a lot of people, you know, I got a press release out a couple of years ago. My personal opinion is that in a few years' time, we're going to look at bariatric surgery in the same way that we look at Chinese foot binding as some kind of, you know, body mutilation that's completely unnecessary. So I had a top line of a press release that went out that is, I figured out with desk research how many things like gastric bands and bypasses had taken place in a year. And my top line was that these thousands and thousands of bariatric surgery was completely unnecessary, because there is a viable alternative to help people lose weight that doesn't involve, you know, the mutilation of internal organs. That was quite a sensationalist kind of story, because the moment you say unnecessary surgery is happening, that becomes shocking, in the same way that some people will remember the Alderhay scandal, where doctors were keeping babies' body parts in kind of tubes and things like that. So there are ways, I think, that we can kind of tap into this fear or misunderstanding of hypnosis and actually use it to get good quality PR coverage by kind of playing on those fears a little bit.
Now, to go we both know a therapist who's very good at utilising the media, and in some cases, just one post can actually build up his business a hell of a lot more. We did invite him to actually come and talk this evening. Steve Miller. One of the posts now, which I'll actually put on, which is one of the biggest ones, and I know it really did help shoot up his whole Hypnosis brand, that we should fat shame people. Controversial weight loss guru Steve Miller thinks body acceptance campaigns are poisonous, and overweight nurses should wear I'm fat badges. Now, you know, as much as what was the aim here? Was the aim to push, obviously, the weight side of it? Was it to actually say that people need to be pushed in the right direction? Or was it just to get the gossip of knowing that the media would share this, for then to people to go, weight loss guru? Oh, I'd like to have a chat with him. Surely he could help my weight and get this 3 stone off me that I require. So clearly, as much as half the people go, how dare you fat shame me because I'm overweight, or the nurses side of it, some people would have looked at that, but a lot of people went, oh, weight loss, he was the guy on Fat Fighters, I want to get in contact with him.
What's
your view?
Yeah, I mean, I've got strong views on that. My personal view is that, weirdly, I agree with both things simultaneously, even though they're contradictory. And that is that I believe that fat shaming isn't helpful. Personally, I think actually for the vast majority of people, fat shaming is going to entrench their belief that they're not in control of it, that it's happening to them, that it's genetic, and kind of propagates this feeling of a victim. There is an argument that says the point of fat shaming is potentially to get someone to the point of threshold where it becomes an absolute must rather than a should. I think there's better ways of doing that than fat shaming. But at the same time, knowing the media as I do, I think that Steve Miller has found a way to effectively be the Katie Hopkins of the hypnosis world, in the sense that he's willing to say the kind of things that are controversial just enough to get the limelight on him, but then try and twist the narrative to be beneficial in some way. And I've heard Steve do this. His argument is that, well, the end justifies the means, and who cares, long as he can get them to the point where they've successfully lost weight, which at some level, you know, you could argue that point and say, yeah, why not? You know, why not? As long as they get to a point where they're a healthier weight and their self-esteem is up and the confidence is up. But for me, it's a fairly cynical media strategy to be the one saying that controversial thing, but it does work because most hypnotherapists, I don't think would say fat shaming is a good idea. So him being the one willing to say that is quite a good PR strategy because it means he gets the coverage when other people won't.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And
he's known for his way,
his journalistic background as well. He knows exactly what and how we say things.
Rode,
have you got anything on that you'd like to add at all?
Not really. I've not had much dealings with him. My personal opinion is fat shaming is just wrong. I think anything like that where you're shaming someone for the way they are, and when they're obviously not in conscious control of the problem, is counterproductive. There is definitely better ways of doing it. So I'm against it, but I can see how that could get him business. But I don't think it's a good strategy. I think it alienates him against the rest of his community of people that, the hypnotists across the world, all from my knowledge sort of have the same opinion of him, that this is not the best way of doing it. So I think in that respect, he's alienating himself from his peers.
Yeah, cool, awesome.
Which is fine if he doesn't care about that, and I don't really think he does. But at the same time, it kind of works for him in the sense that my understanding of the media, and I'm sure his understanding of the media, is that quite often the BBC or the ITV or a tabloid wants two alternative sides on an argument. So if you've got someone that says, I think fat shaming is a great idea, well, that's a very small pond to fish from. There isn't many people that think that's a good idea. But if the media sent out a journo request saying, we'd like to find someone who wants to speak about empowering and constructive ways to help people lose weight without surgery, that's a very long list. But the list of people willing to promote fat shaming as a way to lose weight, that's a very short list. So from that perspective, it does position him in a way that he will come across to a lot of people as a no-nonsense talker, where his heart's in the right place, but he'll say it as it is. And even if not everyone agrees with that, it still gives him that platform to say that thing. So, controversy, unfortunately or fortunately, is a recipe for media coverage, but it is a very, as Katie Hopkins has found out several times in her career, to be that controversial, kind of figure willing to say outlandish things, whether they believe it or not, is a high risk strategy, because every now and then it's going to bite you in the ass.
Yeah, absolutely. And
what was it? I just had something right there on my tongue, which just gone off the way. But yeah, like I say, it's right there as well.
Also, if there's anyone who wants to speak about anything that we're talking about tonight, please, in the bottom line, as we said earlier, we are recording on YouTube. It is a safe place to chat. So please do look to come up and share your points as well. And we've got even more points as well, Adam. So in fact, one of the very good ones it comes all the way from Hazel Gale. She had she and a friend where is it? There we go. They had this very good last year at the start of the election, where they started to the mass online hypnosis session for people during the coronavirus. So straight away, utilising the Instagram and their points, pushing out this online hypnosis session, they were able to make people just to get them thinking at another level, exactly how hypnosis can be pushed. And most importantly, like I said, a lot of people in hypnotherapy can help these steps of our balance. So as much as we have got people trying to push negativity, also advertisement of positivity is also there. And the way how Hazel and Kit Palmer by online sessions, I'm sure by having the newspapers, it assisted us massively as therapists as Zoom started to get used
a lot more regularly in order to throw up sessions at distance online. Now, I know there's a lot of people who haven't necessarily been able to gel with Zoom or not have the confidence. But there's a lot of people as well who's just completely changed their practice into the fact that they won't do anything else other than Zoom now. And Adam, as you mentioned at the start, you've changed your way a little bit, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I used to do so many sessions a week in Harley Street. I live in Hertfordshire, so for me, our trip into London, maybe do a session. I used to do a lot of my sessions on a Sunday, so I could do like 3, 4, 5 clients in a row, then come back. But it's a big chunk of time. And for me, the biggest frustration was you know, every now and then, I'd have an hour journey into London. The client wouldn't show up, and then I've had to pay for that additional space. And so for me, you know, I already decided to move out of the Harley Street clinic even prior to lockdown. It was a great thing that I did that, because it saved me a fortune in kind of clinic fees. I lucky, I guess, in the sense that I was already working with international clients over Zoom and Skype even prior to that. So it just meant I was doing more of that. But I mean, going back to the media thing with Hazel Gale, one of the ways in which you can increase the probability of using the media for you, they did it in that particular article, is a first, you know. So if you are the first to do a certain thing, that's going to help you get media coverage because it's new, and that's the new bit in news. It's like, oh, we haven't seen this before. So if you're able to take advantage of certain trends and things like that, I mean, I've got a lot of media coverage for new addictions. I got a huge amount of coverage about a year ago talking about binge watching addiction. So the fact that you can, you know, watch tons and tons of, you know, hour upon hour of Netflix and Amazon Prime. I'd worked with a few clients that had that issue, and the media hadn't reported on it. So that was a great opportunity for me to get, you know, literally tens of thousands of pounds worth of free publicity by talking about something that hadn't really been talked about. So there are opportunities. I guess the fear that some people have about being in the media is that they see people relatively high profile, and then when the media turn on them, they do turn on them quite viciously. I don't know if anyone recalled, you know, Tony Robbins' experience, not technically a pure hypnotherapist, but certainly in that kind of sphere. And you know, there was a period of time where it was full on crisis management. You know, it was kind of, let's see if we can kind of take this guy down. And I think people seeing these high profile, whether it's a Marissa Peer or a Tony Robbins, and obviously over the years, Richard Bandler's had, you know, no end of, you know, quite controversial stories. But when you see those kind of things, it's going to be, I think, it would make the average therapist nervous because they would think, oh, well, if I'm in the media a lot, that could happen to me. And I think that's to some extent a valid fear. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to click 4 buttons at once. No, absolutely. You know, it's you've just got to find that right balance. And even when you look back at other things, Big Brother, you know, Jade Goody was all of a sudden a hero. Then she went to zero. Like say, Katie Price has been up there in the media, crashed back down, and many people. And obviously, when that comes to, you know, I know we're here talking about hypnosis and stuff, but when it comes around to just mental health, in particular, look at Caroline Flack, and you know, literally to the point where they just wouldn't stop until, unfortunately, someone took their own lives, which is massively unfortunate too. Jessica, you've asked the call. What would you like to share?
Good evening, everybody. I've got a couple of things off of what's just been said. I was going to add from the point about being the first to do something that will get you media coverage. I've got an example of this last lockdown, which is not necessarily the first, but a very specific request for somebody. They wanted people who had started a specific exercise through Zoom in lockdown and planned to continue it face to face once the restrictions ease. And so I had that. I was teaching kickboxing online through Zoom, and then I had a client who was going to continue working with me face-to-face outdoors locally. So that got me in a national magazine. It got me in Feel Good You because it happened to be very specific. It's really hard to get workout routines from home in national press. But because that was kickboxing on Zoom, then face-to-face, I ticked all the boxes and managed to get that press coverage. Other than that, I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have the experience with the hypnosis yet. And then the second point that you said about that fear of the backlash, going from being like praised and the hero to then being turned upon. I think my views on that is as long as the actions that you're taking, so the controversy, for example, if it's aligned with your values, it's aligned with your vision and what you're working towards, it'd be really stupid to go out there and start fat shaming people just to get attention if you don't believe in that. If you genuinely do believe in what you're promoting, I don't think it's a negative thing to get negative backlash, because there will be people who support you who are also aligned with what you are speaking out about. I hope that made sense.
100%, Jessica. And you actually just reminded me about what I forgot about before. Come back to Miller a little bit. As people know, I like to have a little play on TikTok.
And lo and behold,
he was reenacting comments that he used to use back when he was on Fact Fighter. And you'd be amazed how much then comments actually got people's attention.
And people were actually thanking him for that pick up the bum sort of comment. So I
genuinely do believe he believes in it, and I believe there's an approach. But at the same time, there are people out there who genuinely
enjoy getting in that direction. The other thing is, Jessica, I'm sure a few people may be wondering, is how did you actually find the request for the press in order to be able to jump up to the mark, so to say?
That's an interesting story. I was part of a membership called Get in the Press. So it was they did really well. They managed to create a membership community very quickly in lockdown, right place, right time. I became a founding member, and they issued us with, on a Tuesday and a Thursday, a list of journalist requests. But an easier way, without being part of a membership, you could also go onto Twitter and type in #journo request, and you could just keep. Again, I'm by all means, I don't have much experience with PR at all, but there are always journalists looking for specific stories, and then vice versa. You can also pitch a specific story to journalists because they want to publish things.
Absolutely, and that's what it goes back to back at the start when Adam first joined onto this group and shared his expertise with it. So thank you very much for joining us. That's a brilliant point. Adam, obviously you also mentioned before about the reason for people how they get portrayed. Now, one of the big people who's had multiple amounts of news engagement, whether it was tricks of the mind, whether it was how he's doing hypnosis, was it even the exposure to when he first came out, was Darren Brown. And let's face it, overall it's been positive. It's been positive news. But we actually found quite an interesting just before we started this, and it was a self-confessed that he put on there. I was a terrible attention seeker. So wherever it was, Psychology Illusionist has delighted TV audiences to explain why he give it all up and paint caricature and how magic made his questions religious faith. So straight up there, you've got Darren Brown, who's known by everyone, literally around the world, how really, the main reason he was up there getting on TV was down to his attention seeking. How do you find that, Adam?
I mean, he's also a very talented mentalist and hypnotist. I think there are lots and lots of attention seekers that aren't able to build an audience and have multiple TV shows and those kind of things. He's also a very, very good, I would say, he was very good at playing the media at their own game. So for me, I remember him being interviewed on Chris Moyles, back when Chris Moyles used to be good, a long time ago, when he had his Russian roulette stunt, and he had to, I think, do it in France because he wasn't allowed to do it in the UK. And there was this whole question of, is it actually loaded and all that kind of stuff. And he just played it very, very well as to, is it real? Is it not? You know, is it a trick of the mind? Is it influence? Is it suggestion? And he played the media very well because he was able to exploit those fears, exploit those suspense in many ways to build a huge following. He had, I mean, I've listened to a few podcasts where he's been interviewed, and he had some really fascinating insights early on in his career. When he was on Tricks of the Mind on Channel 4, he had the profile, but he hadn't converted that profile into viable business. So he was this kind of TV mentalist, you know, on the weekend. Then he was doing like close-up magic in restaurants in Bristol on the weekend. And then there was this real disconnect. But what he was very, very good at, I think, was tapping into that fascination. And he played that role of this, you know, slightly spooky, weird, strange guy with kind of powers. Effectively, he played into the archetype very, very well, because the media wanted something like that. Paul McKenna didn't really fit the mold, because Paul McKenna wasn't a magician or a mentalist that became a hypnotist. He was a radio presenter that became a stage hypnotist. So for him, it didn't really have that kind of fascination. Whereas Darren Brown, you know, I think is a little bit, he comes across more genuine, I think, and but also has got that element of nobody knows what he could do next. And because he's quite good at kind of, I think he's excellent at making magic look like mentalism. And because he's so good at that, lots of people are falling for that misdirection and saying, well, he must be doing it with hypnosis. He must be doing it with mind control. Actually, a lot of the time, it's nothing to do with that. It's just kind of very good participation of or selection of participants and very good misdirection. But he does it very well. I've seen stage some of his shows, live shows. He's an excellent performer, and I think that's why he got all those kind of opportunities rather than him being an attention seeker. I think he clearly is a someone who practices a hell of a lot. You know, I think that's probably what made him, you know, successful in what he chose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I've read the books and things like that. I don't know if you're aware, but when he was back at university, because he was so on his own and everything like that, people will notice it when he's got a nervous nod. That was his first influence to people. Just trying to get them to say yes, the point where it became a tick. Also true that game when you put your index finger and thumb together, you know, you have to give someone a punch for it. I remember one of the stories he said where he actually camped outside the mate dorm room at the window with his hand like that, ready. So when he opened the curtain, it catch him out. That's how, you know, when he says he's an attention seeker, there's definitely the stories. And the other thing is, I've just pulled it up here. I don't know if you know just how well, as it says on that story, he was stopping his entertainment to do more caricatures. And here's an example of just some of the pictures that he's done. If you've never seen him before, he's there's a picture of him doing Monroe. He's absolutely phenomenal for his attention to detail of what he can actually achieve. It's just unreal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I follow Darren on Instagram, and you know, he talks a lot where he you know, communicates a lot more about his art these days than he does about, you know, what he's doing in terms of you know, anything else really. I think that's probably his true passion in many ways. But you know, he was able, one of the very few people I think that was able to take that kind of concept of kind of using the mind or you know, stage hypnosis in many ways, although it was packaged in a different way, mentalism, and the media was happy to go along with the ride. Paul McKenna, very early on, when he started doing all those stage shows in the 90s, there was scandal after scandal. and lawsuit after lawsuit, and effectively very different approaches to the media. Generally, Paul McKenna went through the litigation route because he had the funds to do it. A lot of people don't know he's the best-selling non-fiction author in the UK. He's got the resources to do it. So pretty much the only thing these days you can see of Paul McKenna is PR fluff. You're seeing him flog his latest book, training, whatever it might be. Whereas I think with Darren, particularly in the early days when he was building his brand, it was almost as orchestrated, but they were happy to kind of really go along. I've not seen negative, stories about Darren Brown, but more the suspense kind of stories, particularly in the early days. So I think of the two of them, definitely Darren compared to Paul McKenna is better at handling the media. I think he just does it better.
Yeah, and
it all comes down to this natural approach. What he's got is the same of
he's not over flamboyant. He's very laid back.
Everything he's very laid back with it and goes to the other thing I like about Darren as well is some of his news articles for when he did it, the whole fancy stuff, every feeling, the way he's pulled that whole to shreds. It's to create credibility, although he uses incredible stuff to incredible, which is even more fantastic in the way that he does stuff.
It gets a bit meta, doesn't it? When he's kind of like using the very things to kind of contradict or dispel the things. He'll use faith healing to prove that faith healing is nothing about faith healing, but simply suggestion and things like that. So, yeah, I think he plays the game very well.
I went to see him in London and with my wife, and he did a whole demonstration, and she still came away saying, "So it is real, then, yeah?" I'd like to take a moment actually to welcome anyone else up on the stage, someone who may have a story to sell, not to sell, to share,
they may have seen the video, or maybe in the media to assist you
with the delivery of anything, it's just getting more clients or anything like that.
Also, if you've seen a shocking story in the media about hypnosis, what's your first story that you saw in the media about hypnosis that kind of maybe changed your perception, or what's the latest story about hypnosis or hypnotists that you've seen in the media? Come up on stage, tell us about it, because effectively, the role that the media has to play is that it's about shaping perceptions, and even now, I would say less impact, than before, mainstream tabloids because of things like social media. But a lot of the kind of, let's say, social media stories about hypnosis that tend to be shared tend to be, those that kind of are more sensationalist in nature and kind of play on that kind of surprise element or power or perceived control of the hypnotist. So any thoughts, any questions you have, raise your hand and we'll get you up on stage.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the other thing as well is what else have you seen? What else have you seen in the media? What else has been pushed? Do you actually see especially after the last 16 months of everything going on with kids? And there are a lot of people have actually lost trust in the media. People actually invested to news, to read the newspapers, and look at that. There's a point on that too. Obviously, just to reiterate as well, as we said before, because we've come up to the last 10 minutes now, we are live on YouTube. If you look on our Facebook page, we'll be sharing a link to you be able to watch this back if you've missed any of it as well. Because we should be sharing, we should chat about all these different topics. And we've got many more to come up in the weeks to come. So, Jessica or Rowan, have you got anything else to share when it comes to the media?
Not really with regard to the media, but I was on stage during Darren Brown's Miracle Healing show because I was suffering from a lung problem at the time. And I noticed that before the break, they'd got us all to fill in these little forms to say what was going on. And then when we were queuing up at the side, they sort of ushered me and a couple other people with serious problems to the front so that we could be up on stage first, so you could see the power of his miracle healing firsthand. It was quite interesting to watch that, along with the real sort of he did a proper induction before the break, I think it was, where he was using light and sound and everything to really create an adrenaline response in the system. And, that does so much for just switching off pain in the body. So it was really interesting from a hypnotist to be part of that and be pulled up for that as well and taken on stage by him.
And it's probably fair to say that even though you knew what you were going through, you still saying the suggestions took place and you still got the response that you believed it would be.
Yeah, I mean, the suggestions took hold. They didn't last, but there was definitely a reduction in the discomfort in my chest, and it was sort of quite early on into quite a severe respiratory problem at the time. So it was quite interesting to see that. And I'd been working with quite a lot of self-suggestion, self-hypnosis up to that point for my immune system and my own healing. So it was, I think it was massively beneficial for me to know what was going on and to know how powerful that self-suggestion had been being for me and would continue to be if I carried on working with it, just to have that experience. And I think, it touches on a really important point to me, is this idea of sort of once in a lifetime experiences causing these real openings of the mind where we can take on suggestion. And it goes back to something I was watching Gabor Mate's Wisdom of Trauma, and it was tying into polyvagal theory and therapy from Deb Dana, this idea that we don't actually have trauma in the experience. It's the meaning-making part of the mind after the experience, telling ourselves a story that causes the real trauma. And being in these once-in-a-lifetime experiences, like being up on stage at a Darren Brown show, or, if you go and have an ayahuasca ceremony, or, if you have a consultation with Bob, I know his ones, it has that same effect on people, where you're never going to forget that experience. And that in itself, I think, really cements in these suggestions taking hold. There's a piece in a book by Ernest Rossi, The Psychobiology of Gene Expression, and he talks about this in a little bit more detail about, if you're ever asked to volunteer for a stage show for hypnosis or something like that, put your hand up because you're going to get a change. And I think that's a valid thing with all of these sort of, stage hypnosis and all the media stuff as well. If you're a part of that, it's going to cement into your unconscious mind in ways that you might not get in other scenarios.
Rowan, I think you've actually just summarised the last 2 weeks in that beautiful way there. Just to be able to actually talk about the whole media and how that was all portrayed with Darren Brown and everything, and then also pull back to the fact how stage hypnosis and even just with that quote, what to do, and you always get that change. I think that just brings it really good into that whole summary for that. Do you agree with that, Adam?
Oh, massively. Yeah, massively. And I think the other way in which the media can, be helpful is a form of priming for clients. So, the reason why I think the media is such a worthwhile risk is that it carries so much credibility. There's one thing you saying something about yourself, but when the media says it carries much more weight. So, for those of you that have been featured in the media, if you have got clients that are booking a consultation call or inquiring about you, setting up some autoresponder emails that over the period of a couple of weeks share that media coverage of you with them prior to that consultation call or prior to that first session, at some level that's going to influence their perception of your competency and your positioning and your authority, and that itself will have more of an impact on the hypnosis. So you can actually use the media coverage to enhance your ability to create change in your clients, because they're no longer seeing you just as this kind of stranger that kind of has hypnotherapy. You're getting that kind of validation and verification and endorsement from the media coverage that you've been in. So I've said this a few times, but if you're featured in the media, leverage that to help your hypnosis become even more effective.
It's the ultimate referral, isn't it, really?
Well, it is. Yeah, it's a seal of endorsement, in many ways. So, we'd be crazy to kind of know that we're in the industry of kind of perception and kind of how beliefs influence behavior, and then not use all the tools that we can to create more powerful change with clients? Like, why wouldn't we do that?
And it comes back to your PR, the whole PR talk that you did as well, Adam, just by having that as featured on BBC, the Times, wherever your stories have been, that person's instantly getting a suggestion, letting know that the fact that they believe, whether they go in and actually look at them stories, if someone clicked onto yours, it's the BBC, and they see you with Victoria Derbyshire, the power of that is absolutely massive. And you're always going to get that change, I believe, anyway, because that person's credibility is absolutely through the roof for that person, and it's the reason why Paul McKenna has had so many book sales, because of all the other work that he's done. So many people believe in him that they also create. It's like Alan Carr as well with his smoking book. How many people have said, "Oh yeah, I quit smoking after reading this book"? The suggestion of people passing on the book to people is just re-emphasizing what is going to happen. Don't get me wrong; the context within the book is also about the third time make that work. But the credibility of people on sharing it, whether recommending it, whichever way it is, to be able to bring that up. Also going to impact that just as much. So have you got any final words before we finish, Adam? If anyone wants to come up, just that little hand, we can get you to have a quick. We've got about 3-4 minutes left.
Yeah, I mean, my. Oh, sorry, go on, Jessica. So you took the mic off.
I have nothing extremely important to add, just a story and an anecdote of my own experience of being in the media, and how to remember that whatever you post on social media may come back at any time, and be prepared for it. So I did a live, and it was probably my most watched live to date. So I titled it, "What would you do if a man turned up at your door selling a giant bag of sex toys?" And I used it to describe how I will never be jumping in people's inboxes, telling them that they should buy something, that they should lose weight, because it's not appropriate. And I use that analogy that why would it be wrong of him to do that if we're going to approach people when they don't want to be approached, people in the health and fitness industry being we. And time went on, and I wasn't thinking anything about that live, and I got invited on a radio show. So there I am thinking, what's going to come up? Probably kickboxing, probably maybe hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy doesn't come up as much. And he began with, "So what was that about the sex toys?" And I was like, okay, let's explain that now then. So going back to that, like being controversial with the content and everything, sex sells. And although it's not really related to what I do, it was an analogy, and it got people's attention, and it got me on a radio show, I guess. So, the point is, you never know what's going to come up and when.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, that's a brilliant story, and something brilliant to summarize with as well. And it's like Kaz Riley with she does all her sexual work for hypnosis as well. And I think her biggest hitting video is the one of using the hypnotic orgasm, and 100% sex sells. I'm pretty sure she's had articles on that as well, and other companies pushing that video out because of how much it's assisted people around the world, and lo and behold, packed out her diary from work. So yeah, if you can utilize the media in a positive way, absolutely do so. Obviously, I think with everything else, watch out, because some things, exactly what Jessica said, can come back and bite you on the arse, and it's the last thing you want. You don't want to be portraying yourself in a negative limelight. So yeah, Adam, have you got anything else to finish with?
I mean, if I'm summarizing, I would say the vast majority of hypnosis, the way that hypnosis, in terms of quantity of articles and things like that, generally is quite positive. It's going to be, things like NICE recommends hypnosis for IBD. It's going to be case studies, this person lost this much weight, but they're never going to make front page news, and we shouldn't expect them to. And I think we should completely accept that the most newsworthy stories are when people that happen to be hypnotherapists are convicted of some kind of a crime or some kind of a scandal, or use their position for some kind of negative or creepy goals, yeah, they're quite rightly going to make the news, because that is more newsworthy than these other stories. But in the same way that there are relatively few stories of doctors and nurses, killing patients, there's relatively few in quantity stories of hypnotherapists, getting into trouble, because I think the vast majority of people in the industry of hypnosis and hypnotherapy are very good people with good motives. And whenever anyone asks me if hypnosis is dangerous, I always just tell them how cheap my insurance is. If there was risks attached to hypnosis, my insurance should be similar to that of a GP or a surgeon, and it isn't. It's like £60 a year or something like that. So for me, that's a way of reassuring people that hypnosis is safe. And from the media perspective, the opportunity is that we can tap into that fascination with hypnosis, with the mind, and use it strategically to help build our profiles, serve more people, and most of all, educate people that change is possible in a way that perhaps a lot of people don't believe that it is. And that's how the media can actually be used for us rather than against us.
As always, Adam, brilliant summary, and especially with that analogy of utilising the insurance, and as soon as you say that to someone, the penny must surely drop. Everyone, as always, thank you very much for joining us. We will have some more scheduled posts up very soon as to what we're going to be covering in the next couple of weeks. As mentioned, this has been streamed onto YouTube Live, so if you've just joined and missed us, you'll be able to find myself or Adam's Facebook page. And like I said, thank you very much for joining us and sharing, especially to Rowan and Jessica. So, like I said, if you enjoy this, and any other friends, we're here every Thursday night till 10 p.m. And take care, everyone. See you all very soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.